Hello! Today I'm going to talk about the method for measuring the collective experience of a repository and how it can be related to the usage of an advanced programming concept. My name is Heidi Hokka, and last year I graduated from Sweden University with a bachelor's degree in software engineering. My co-authors are Felix Dobslaw, who is my examiner from Sweden University, and Jonathan Bengtsson, a fellow student who worked with me in the original bachelor's thesis. Before getting into details, I would like to give a slight overview of the contents of the presentation. First, I will walk you through the background on which this study is built upon, namely Lambdas in C++ and developer experience as it has been measured in earlier studies. After that, I will go through how we formulated our work and what had been done previously. In this part, we describe our approach to figuring out if there's a correlation between developer experience and Lambda use in repositories. To round up, we go through our results, formulate our conclusions, and discuss the possibilities for future work. To start, let's discuss Lambdas. What are they? Lambda is a functional programming concept present in multiple programming languages that originates from mathematics. In programming, they can be used as anonymous functions to avoid having to declare a new function and instead just defining it in place. This anonymous function can be stored in a variable and passed around if required. In C++, which is the language scope for this study, the typical characters for a lambda are brackets, which allows the lambda to capture variables from the enclosing scope, parentheses, which contain parameters passed to the lambda, and finally curly brackets, which contain the instructions that the lambda performs. I will show a small example of how to multiply the integers in a vector in three ways. You could do it with a for loop by reference. You could write a new function and pass it to for each. But you could also just write the function in place in for each with a lambda. This could be beneficial if you only need this function in a single place to prevent cluttering a class. But why are the different syntaxes for doing the same thing interesting? This is because the successful use of lambdas has previously been linked to the experience of a developer. But before we continue, how has developer experience been measured? Previous studies have measured developer experience by study progress, years of experience as a developer, and by company titles such as junior and senior. Open source projects generally lack this type of information for each participant, making it difficult to apply the same metrics. That is why it has been measured differently in repositories. Here the examples include analysis of readmes for keywords, how many commits an author has made to a single method, and the number of days between the author's first and latest commit. However, there seems to be no agreed on standard to measure experience here, to the best of our knowledge. I will briefly touch upon the related work that served as a major inspiration to this work, amongst others, of course. Uzbek and others showed that less experienced developers were slower or unable to solve tasks with C++ lambdas, while they were more successful using for loops. With our study, we wanted to see if this generalizes to open source repositories. That is there a correlation between developer experience and lambda use in open source repositories? To measure the developer experience in repositories, we drew inspiration from Bengtsson, Tan's and Lam's study about investigating if the time of day and developer experience led to the introduction of bugs. To measure the developer experience of a commit, they calculated the difference between the first commit made by the same author to the commit in question where a bug could have been introduced. We adapted the method and scaled it up into measuring the mean experience for each repository, which I will introduce on the next slide. Here we introduce a new measurement called mean repository experience, or MRE for short. It is a measurement for the mean collective experience of a repository where each author with at least 2 commits at least one day apart are counted. The commits must have made it to the main branch of the repository. For each repository, the values are summed up and divided with the amount of eligible authors. This value is the MRE for that repository. Our approach to answering our question consisted of 3 steps. First, we decided to clone 500 C++ repositories. The repositories were picked from a dataset called Reaper that had used machine learning to analyze projects and predict whether a project on GitHub was of a software engineered nature. We constructed 2 tools, one to statically analyze the existence of lambdas in a repository and another to calculate the previously mentioned MRE for each repository. The tools were used to split the group into 2 sets, one that used C++ lambda and another set that did not. These 2 sets were then compared by their MRE. After running our tools, we compiled our results into a graph showing the MRE values of the sets of repositories using lambdas and those that did not. The lighter gray bars are for repositories with no lambdas and the darker gray for those containing lambdas. The bars are proportional to the percentage of repositories in each set so that both bars amount to 100%. Each MRE value in a set is placed within an interval of 500 MRE. Out of the 500 repositories, 175 repositories contained a lambda, according to our tool. In the graph, you can see that the group of lambdas is distributed more into the higher intervals of MRE. To show the distribution in numbers, a table was created. The median and mean values of MRE were higher for the group of lambdas. For this study, we set out to investigate whether lambdas can be linked to developer experience in open source repositories using the here introduced MRE metric. Most of the repositories had a MRE of 500 or less, while repositories with 500 MRE or more were more likely to use lambdas. While there is a statistically significant correlation between MRE and lambda use, the usage and necessity of lambdas may depend on other parameters such as the contributor's purposes. Also, measuring developer experience by a developer's first and last commit may not accurately portray the developer's experience, but may serve as an indicator of commitment. In this study, we introduced a new metric. It can be applied when using repository mining in research, such as a repository filter, when assessing the amount of effort put into a project, perhaps as a proxy for software quality. As could be interpreted from the results, the set of repositories that were using Lambda showed a statistically significant higher mean MRE than the set that did not use Lambda. This could support the correlation of C++ Lambda and developer experience, as shown by USpec and others. However, we did not take into account the causation of why a repository would need to use Lambda in C++. We only measured this quantitatively. Future work could investigate how MRE maps to true developer experience, such as with qualitative assessments of real candidates. Further, we plan to use MRE to analyze usage of other advanced features to identify possible correlations with collective developer experience or commitment. We intend to look at combinations of advanced features and reactive streams use. Further, variants of MRE could be developed and evaluated to gather more data points when doing repository mining. That's it for our presentation, and thank you for listening.